regards to mobile advertising. We assembled the best experts in the industry. We're here, and we're all going to talk about native ads, banner placements, alternative forms of advertising. Basically, how do you make as much money as possible in the app without creating as much friction for the users? So, I'm going to let start off with letting everybody introduce themselves, take a minute or so, and explain what you do.
Hi, my name is Sake Sora. I'm from the Rubicon project. Quickly about Rubicon, we are a leader in automating the buying and selling of advertising, and best known for our ad exchange, which is one of the largest ad exchanges out there. Exchanges, and we're probably will get into that a bit. And my responsibility at Rubicon has been primarily in leading the product and technology work at the company and a few of the business partnerships.
Michael Cambrath, I work for Quantcast. Quantcast is a digital audience measurement and targeting company. We help people, publishers like yourself, understand the nature of the audience that use your app, your website, and we actually recently launched support for both devices too. And help advertisers find the audiences that they're looking for. I'm the VP of engineering here. I run our measurement product, our total efforts, and our big data mining and infrastructure companies to do that.
I'm Raj, I'm CEO of Tempo AI. We make Tempo Smart Calendar. It's a very cool calendar for the sort of business professional. It brings a lot of context into your day. From the perspective of advertising, previous lives worked in recipe space at a recipe app called All the Cooks. Prior to that, had YouTube's first mobile site. It's called TinyTube. Before we got CMD, so I was a top 10 mobile web publisher in the US for a short while. So I can talk with respect to advertising along those lines.
Hi, I'm Scott Brady from StartApp. I run West Coast operations. We are a mobile ad platform used by about 125,000 apps globally. We focus on innovative creative types and also smart targeting on the back end to really optimize for advertisers and publishers. And you may not have heard of us because we came out of the sort of global long-tail Android world originally and grew up from there. So you have a different perspective on this and some other people.
I'm Greg Black, and I work for OMX, and our goal is to connect or to generate as much revenue for any publisher on any connected screen. So that's across desktop, tablets, mobile, and we're a full stack solution, which means that things like navigation, video, banner ads, pretty much any media native ad. So, all right, without further ado, I'm going to jump into some of the questions. And we were talking in the back room over here, and I learned that many of our panelists also have experience, first-hand experience creating their own apps as well, so it gives us a unique perspective on advertising. So the first thing that I'm going to ask for is, so for those of you that have built apps in the past, from a design perspective, did you go in with advertising in mind? Or did you end up choosing a different monetization model, Raj?
Well, I'll go first. So kind of give you an understanding. I do that on the side. It's not part of my Quantcast efforts. And basically, when my kids were born, daughters were born, I wanted to build apps for them to learn. So create kid apps. And that is not an appropriate place for advertising. So my approach to monetization, make my time and effort worth it other. See what kids enjoy it was paying downloads, basically.
With Tempo's in the productivity category, and the productivity category is a little unique in that you don't see a lot of advertising, given that we're dealing with workflows. You tend to see more subscription kind of models or one-time paid. When I used to work in the lifestyle category, advertising was definitely the model. We didn't think about advertising on day one so much from a UX perspective. We thought about it more from the perspective of level setting our users. So our users know to expect advertising, so 6 months down the road when we bring in advertising, it wouldn't cause higher than normal attrition because they're like, wait, all of a sudden you're just advertising what's this, Because pretty much always through the introduction of advertising, usually you're making the experience worse. I mean, people can argue with me, but and then at that time, what's interesting was we then really did start looking at redesigning the experience with where we could put banner spots. And it is a constant game being an app developer from the standpoint of we're trying to beat the ad networks. So not necessarily following all of the guidelines. How can we surface, how many ads can we surface on each screen and so forth while not pissing off the user. So I think there's a little bit of both, but I also think there's a truth to don't put the wagon in front of the horse from the standpoint that you can build it in out of day one, but if you don't get more than 10 impressions a day, it doesn't really matter.
Yeah, so my experience building an app was kind of similar to Michael's. It was a very unique situation when I built the app. But based on my experience working with a lot of app developers, I feel like when you're building the app, you have to clearly think of what your business model is going to be. Some may be fortunate enough not to have to think of it immediately, but advertising is one of the ways in which you can make money. And you may choose not to start that on day one, but what is important is to learn about how it works well for your category of application, and when you may want to actually introduce that. So I would say keep learning, and then make a well thought of decision of when you want to start.
Yeah, and I think that goes with the overall theme here. It's generating as much revenue as possible without creating friction for your users. So on that note, so do you have any, I'd love to hear from each company, right, a specific use case you've had to where you've introduced ads into an app, maybe it's a specific category, maybe it's a specific type of app, and then the success that you've had with the unique ad unit that you chose. As you know, there are some different types of ad units that are out there, so I'd love to hear, what's working and what's not.
Okay, I'll talk about a company. This was 7 years ago. I had a ringtone company. And so what's interesting here is we introduced ads, but I feel like there's two kinds of apps. There's apps that are solving some sort of painful workflow, and there's really no other way to do it. So, doesn't matter what Evernote does with their UI, I'm kind of stuck because my data's sort of locked in. And so you're almost forced to use it. And then there's stuff that, there are alternate experiences that you may just want to jump over if you don't like it anymore. And so they're sort of driving page views and whatnot. In that second experience, I think you want to obviously build an advertising experience that's not bothering the user too much. I was more in the first camp. We were like the only app that would let you make your own music into ringtones for a long period of time. And so my use of advertising was not to generate revenue from advertising, it was to force you into a purchase to make it go away. So I took the opposite approach of actually trying to make the advertising annoying. But there was not an alternative way to do it, and so it's kind of a unique experience. And I wasn't scared of attritioning that user because I knew he didn't really have anywhere else to go. So it just sort of Facebook, for example, put a bunch of ads on their wall. What do? Where are you going to go? You can't, so you have to deal with it. So it's interesting when you think about your application, like where do you fall? Like, do you have enough of a hook or lock-in that you can actually be a little bit more aggressive, or do you need to be really cautious as to how aggressive you want to be as a user?
Yeah, we're working with La Liga, which is the official football app of Spain. And one of the things we did there that was interesting, we actually they used to have time-based advertising. So every 2 minutes or something, they would show an ad. We actually switched it to an action-based advertising. So when they return to the home screen or went through a certain number of pages or something like that, and actually increase the performance of the ads pretty significantly. So there's tricks like that to have it fit right into the user experience and not just be disrupting the ads.
So what I would say is that one of the important things when working with advertising is to certainly be very data-driven and very metrics-driven. The concern of attrition is always there when you start with advertising, and Facebook had the same concern as well. So be sure to measure, and be sure to have that instrumentation in your application to measure how things are going once you introduce advertising. Now, what the framework I use to kind of see that is like in three things. One is think about the advertising that is coming on your to your users, how relevant is that going to be to them? What is the user experience going to be? And thirdly is what volume of ads are you kind of expecting to generate? So obviously if you have too much advertising, it's annoying and that causes attrition. If ads are not relevant, that's also an issue. What we're finding from our own experience right now is that, especially when it comes to the experience part of it, native advertising is very early as in the industry, but it does promise the thing that the experience of the ad complements the experience of your application. So you spend a lot of effort designing a beautiful app and you don't want an ad that disrupts that. So that's where native advertising is kind of proving very helpful in something that keeps your users happy, doesn't really disrupt their experience, but still make sure that you are looking at relevance, how you are using data signals to make sure that ads that are coming up are actually relevant to the user, and keep that volume in check and measure it.
Yeah, speaking of measurement and native advertising, Quantcast has a client, BuzzFeed, you may have heard of them. They, the entire way that they monetize their site and their app is through sponsored posts. There's no display ad or anything else there. And some of the things you read on there are actually paid for by a sponsor. And the way they go about figuring out what is the best way to match a sponsor to a particular post is they measure individual posts with Quantcast measure and understand what is the nature of the audience that use a certain kind of post of it. Men or women or high income, low income, what kind of interests they are. And when they have an advertiser or sponsor come to them to understand what they want to do, they ask the sponsor who's your audience, who you're trying to reach, and they scan their articles to figure out which ones match that advertiser the best, and thus they give the user a better experience that is possibly a more relevant ad or sponsor in this case, and the advertiser gets a better experience with a better audience result.
Yeah, I think you both hit on great points. Data. There's a lot of things you can do with data. So the first thing that I want to know is what pieces of information are important to send to advertisers for both, because we do have exchanges represented here, we do have folks that can help direct sales forces sell them. So
Yeah, I'll start with that because I actually was previously with Nielsen, so spent a lot of time thinking about traditional brand advertising. 18 to 34-year-old female who want to target a certain ad to them. It's kind of fascinating because that doesn't really matter as much, especially because so much mobile advertising is performance driven. It doesn't ad drive to install. And one of the things that really we found matters there is simple things like what other apps are on the device. So you can say, oh, well, if I'm going to push a travel app and they have 4 travel apps already on the device, hey, hotels.com may make a ton of sense. If you're trying to push something like Clash of Clans, they already have Clash of Clans, you probably don't want to do that, but if they have 3 other role-playing games, maybe it makes sense. And then pairing that with other things like, hey, are they on Wi-Fi? Actually download a big app. And are they in a country that makes sense? Are they do they have a modern operating system on their device that fits with the ad type? So maximizing all those things really matters for performance-based advertising.
Something is from the publisher perspective, if you're not a developer. So Android, you're allowed to push a version of your app to a subset of user base. You can say, hey, just give it to 5% of the audience. And why that's so awesome is you can integrate advertising in that 5%. You can actually very, very clearly measure it as a distinct cohort. Because one of the challenges that I had in optimizing advertising on mobile is really trying to figure out the cohort and then map it against retention. That's one thing, but then to map it against potential revenue. And the reason I say that is more ads isn't necessarily better. I'll give you an example. I used to work, I used to run business development at Skyfire, Papa Mobile, which is a browser, and search ads. You would think more search ads means more dollars, but it's actually counterintuitive because it may result in fewer searches and people don't like it. It's just like a right number of ads to show. So in a very similar vein, that makes it really sort of challenging how you measure that cohort to retention and revenue. Plus, you don't really get the revenue metrics real time. I think that's, you're starting to get some of that through some APIs with some of these ad networks, but generally you don't know what the real time bid was on what was just clicked. So trying to maybe on Android and introducing ads to some subset of your user base is a really interesting way to measure this cohort and see what happens.
Well, I'll add something to add to the concept that most advertising on mobile right now is install-based advertising. However, I'd argue that is starting to change as people spend more and more time on their mobile devices and their apps. Advertisers don't want to follow that. Your traditional advertisers, your CPG goods, your folks that are trying to sell autos or stuff like that. And they have a different approach to advertising than apps and stuff. What they want to know is who are they advertising to. They're trying to reach a certain demographic or a certain interest. So being able to know who your audience is, who your people using your app is, it becomes critical as that type of advertising becomes more popular on the mobile platform.
So yeah, talking about the data that as an app publisher we should be sending for advertising. I mean, clearly we see that being able to share the advertising ID for the device is almost essential. Whenever location data is available, it improves revenue by 20 to 40%. That is kind of the base level. But if we go a little bit beyond that, then we have seen examples. For example, we did this with Auto Trader in UK, where people are going to the Auto Trader app and they're searching for cars. And what Auto Trader was able to do was to package portions of their inventory, which are like these people are likely to buy insurance, or these people search for these type of cars. That kind of information is extremely valuable for advertisers to then think that, okay, if you are interested in this car, then what can I advertise to you? So being able to use that kind of data that only Auto Trader or someone like them would have makes their inventory really valuable to advertisers, and being able to leverage that is increasingly important. And then finally, talking about data that as an app publisher you should yourself measure is things like, as I was mentioning earlier, is how is advertising impacting your overall lifetime value of your customers. So Raj mentioned how he was showing annoying ads so that people would actually do an in-app purchase. It's important to know like how much are you charging for that. For example, I've seen apps which charge little. Remember that advertising, you have to see like how much volume would you be able to generate from a user, what CPMs are you able to get if you are best using the data you have and best integrating with the platforms out there. So it's very important to make those decisions by being data driven.
So Raj, you said a very interesting point that Android, you had the opportunity to roll out to 5% of your users. Very curious to hear best practices, best strategies for when do you want to start sending advertising to a larger part of your audience? When do you want to test on a specific subset? Can you tell me a little bit about that experience?
Sure. So I subscribe to all the variations of R or ARM, the R's that they refer to higher acronyms, so acquisition, retention, monetization. And so I think a critical decision you have to make before you do any sort of experiment is what's the goal. Even from a product exercise internally, when we document the features, we always put the hypothesis of what we think it's going to do. When, this again is all former life, not with Tempo, it's more SaaS. When we were testing Android monetization, the goal back then was really simple. It was just we really actually wanted to see if it would boost retention, which is so counterintuitive. And the reason was there's a perception that sometimes if a developer isn't making any money, it's not a legitimate app. And so if you can show some pay model or some way to monetize, would it change perception? And this is especially interesting on the Apple side because there's arguments that if you can get listed on both the paid category and the free category, you can help your overall ASO rank because now you're in two categories and there's a perception that it's a business. We had taken a subset, we had integrated advertising to see what happens, and the really fascinating thing, and I think this is the reality of a lot of analytics, is the output was we couldn't derive a decision. There was really no difference. So we added the advertising, it wasn't materially higher, it wasn't materially lower, and we're like, okay, this is weird, maybe we're not measuring it right. We moved it around, and we weren't seeing any sort of negative or adverse impact. And so it really became a question of like, okay, how much do we care about this revenue, and should we bring it out to the rest of the audience? This is my case in particular. I'm sure other people have other examples. And the funny thing, you're an app developer. Most app developers are independent developers. They're like two people. It's actually work to integrate Nat SDK. It's not. I mean, I know it's like a couple lines of code, but you still have to test it and put it in there. You've integrated one SDK, and there's sort of. I remember we had this debate. We're like, well, we can make more money if we roll it to everyone, but then we have to spend time optimizing it because it was just sort of this perception: if we can do that, we should do that. We should do that as well, and that's work. And how much did we care because it was sort of a hobby app and how we were thinking about it. We ultimately rolled out to both apps, and what's really fascinating was a year went by, and then we're like, okay, the hosting bill is starting to get expensive. We need more revenue. So we added more ads, and then it started affecting our retention. But what's fascinating, it wasn't affecting the 90-day retention. It was affecting the 30-day retention. So it was definitely sort of, people talk about, I call it first 3 days versus first 3 weeks. So in the first 3 days, your goal is to delight, and in the first 3 weeks, it's to solve a real pain point. And the problem is advertising the first 3 days can create an adverse reaction. And so something we never played with, which was an experiment, was to actually bring the advertising after we got you hooked in. So it was no advertising for some number of weeks, and then you would start seeing advertising, but we never got to experiment with that.
And so you made the decision when you started you need to pay for
Yeah.
costs?
Yeah, I mean, as an independent, in that story, I was an independent developer.
And then this question's for the larger group. So what are some best practices in terms of choosing advertising and really making it generate revenue without creating friction for users?
So one thing we've definitely found is that one of the things we specialize is in having sort of 3D interactive full page interstitials, and just seeing the performance level of those, you really matters. I mean, you obviously have to put the ads in the right place, but we found you have things like a banner which may generate a 1% click-through rate, whereas a moving 3D rotating cube generates a 10% click-through rate. And a lot of people will say, oh, maybe that's just people are clicking out by accident because it's full screen. But when we looked at the numbers, the conversion rate is essentially the same, maybe drops a little bit, but you're basically getting 10 times the number of people through that funnel to actually generate revenue. So the nice thing is you can throw out a whole bunch of banner ads if you're looking at the ad load on one particular user and get one ad that more than pays for it, but works. So that's been something that I think has worked really well in terms of optimizing that.
Well, one thing you should consider is the user experience overall. I mean, yeah, interstitial does have a better click-through rate, but if you throw too many of them at the user at all times, people are just going to stop using your app. So you should be paying attention to your user retention and make sure that you're not affecting that. You want to make your advertising unobtrusive and in some ways, from the user perspective, a natural part of an ad that makes sense where it takes place and when they actually experience the ad.
Okay, so talking about best practices, I want to take it in two steps. One of the things Raj mentioned was how to run advertising. You need to spend energy as a developer, and if you're a two-person developer shop, then you may not have the energies to kind of keep track of that. So one is how do you manage advertising yourself, and second is what are the best practices for your users eventually. So I think that's, when it comes to managing advertising, I think that's where I give the plug that the Power and Exchange really comes to your help. Because Exchange is a place where a lot of buyers and sellers are coming together, and things are happening at a very large volume. So instead of trying to manage a lot of ad networks and a lot of SDKs and that kind of stuff, an Exchange really gives you one place where somebody else with the technology and a lot of controls and stuff is kind of managing that for you. They give you controls like being able to block certain types of ads and advertisers and all that kind of thing. So Exchange really simplifies that, reduces friction internally that you have to deal with to just run advertising in the first place. Now when you are running your advertising, one of the things is how deep you want to put it in terms of effort. So the simplest is like put out your impressions, on an exchange. But as you go deeper, you see that there are different levels. If you start taking pieces of your inventory and say, these are more valuable for these reasons, I want to package them, I want to sell them separately as deals to specific types of advertisers who may have some sort of specific interest in them, then you can make more money, but it takes a little bit more effort. And then eventually there are big publishers who have their own direct sales teams who will take another chunk of their inventory and sell it directly to advertisers and make even more money with that. So there are various different levels. You can sign up for what you want to do depending on how much resources you have at your disposal. So that's kind of the best practices from managing advertising as a publisher itself. And then the second, in terms of best practices for your users, I would say that's where it's important to have the, as Michael said, the user experience in mind. It's also important to have the volume in mind, like how much advertising are you running, is it too much or too little, as Raj was mentioning. And then finally, as I was mentioning earlier as well, is like about relevance. Make sure that you are using that the data that you have and you're measuring the impact on users in doing that. But I would say that one of the things that is very promising in our industry right now is native advertising, because native advertising, if you're not familiar with it, is all about building ads to an experience that matches the experience of the app itself. And as it gets adopted and as it scales, we expect to see that the disconnect between user experience and money that you can make can slowly go away.
Just a quick comment on that. I think the interesting about native advertising is it encompasses a big range of options. And so one of the things that we say, I was just talking to a client about this yesterday, is you can have this really cool incent campaign with a lot of customization, but then the ratio of amount of work you have to do for the return, you have to watch that pretty closely. So one of the things that's worked for us is having a simple app offer type of wall with choice, but that you're optimizing the push offers that you think that they might like as part of that. So they feel like they're in the process. It's native, maybe it fits in with the look and feel, but you're not having to put a ton of work into it. So that ratio of work to return is important.
That is a really good point. So I'm going to try to recap some of this. Which is going to be, you have to determine how much advertising you want to display, to who, and to when. And you have to determine how much work you want to put into the app for the return. And then you also have to decide when. So these are all things to keep in mind. Okay. So I'd like to open up to the floor for questions. We've got about 5-10 minutes here to answer the questions. So you have a hand. Got it. So the question is, so in the current apps that you have, or the clients apps, how do you use the different ad formats? Is that what
We also basically symbolize the products, like off the wall.
Dr. Keys, can you speak a little bit more to the incentivized portion of the ad strategy?
Yeah, I can touch on a little bit, but we actually don't do incentivized ads. So it's sort of we complement it in a way. In that, I think it's important to match up what you're giving a user from an incentive. If you do too much incentivized, it's not necessarily relevant. So, and I think one of the important things there is also to look at is, you have to look at metrics downstream eventually, which is how much revenue you're totally, making at the end of the day. So, you could see great numbers out of incentivized ad, but then fill rate's not there, or annoys people. You have to look at where it actually nets out. But a lot of advertisers we found have very different opinions on whether incentivized traffic is good or not. But sometimes they feel like, hey, all right, well, we got an incentivized user, but it didn't lead to the lifetime value that we're looking for. So you kind of have to follow it throughout.
Do you guys have any opinions on comparing freemium business model versus just ad supported?
Any thoughts on freemium versus ad supported?
So I might get talks related to, or incubator kind of talks about building an app. One of the things I ask people is to really think about what category you're in. Is your workflow viral by nature? Is it for teams? Is it individual? And so forth. And I've worked in utility, business, productivity, social video, different sort of categories. The challenge I have found, and again this is me, with advertising, so let's say you're in media, you need a lot of page views before you become, a $10 million sort of annual run rate kind of business, and you're not going to do that with just an RTV. You're going to need direct sales, you're going to need brand ads, you're going to need a lot more than just sort of an exchange. Part of the question is it lifestyle, or are you trying to build like a big business? Like how do you want to scale? I think that's difficult. And actually, if you look at it from a venture perspective, you're seeing like from venture and where investment dollars have been flowing in the last, let's say, 3 years from an app developer perspective, we're seeing a lot more towards freemium kinds of categories. And so freemium categories are like health, productivity, utility, because these categories are multi-platform, so they're pervasive. Not multi-platform meaning multi-device, but they're desktop, online, and so the piece is to try to get you locked into some longer-term freemium kind of story. But you don't see as much in apps that are pure advertising-based models anymore. Most of the cases that I've seen, not necessarily financing, but where we've seen that model, they've already established a brand online on the desktop, and they're bringing mobile, so they have a huge existing audience, but they're not relying upon it as their primary revenue stream. I see a lot more in-app purchase, but again, the question is how do you scale it unless you're going to become a publisher of many apps. It depends.
One actually just tactical thing there we're seeing from a lot of clients now is the evolution, went from we're just doing an app purchase, we're not going to do any advertising, to very quickly it went to, okay, well we want to serve ads to people who aren't purchasing because it's 95% of our audience, we got to monetize those. And then that's quickly from there gone to more of a cohort analysis of, okay, this person hasn't bought, but they haven't bought for 30 days, so there's still a high chance that they buy, and then based on their behavior, what's the probability that they're going to eventually purchase, and adjusting the ads, level of ad traffic they get based on the probability of actual purchase.
Yeah, actually on that note, I've seen more of that on bigger screens. So, or at least what I've seen. So you can be more aggressive on your iPad and your desktop experience. I'll give you an example. Evernote on the desktop has an ad. I don't know if you guys have used the Evernote app on the desktop. There's an ad in software. If you want to make it go away, you have to pay. But they can be annoying there because you have such a big screen. So it's like the annoyance ratio is almost like number of pixels the ad is taking proportional to the size of the screen. So the percentage annoyance.
Yeah, just quickly on that, one of the things that I've seen personally is premium apps that take users towards a subscription, and either it's free and you get a limited set of features, or the subscription and you get a lot of features. But I've seen lacking in many cases kind of a bridge to that, where you can have a few of those features and you can still see some, maybe advertising or something as a way of monetization, because broad access subscription prices are fairly high and they're only hoping to get 5% adoption. So you still need a lot of users before you can generate enough revenue from subscription.
Yeah, Ken did some insight of where advertising works well and where it doesn't. Just look at the web and see where advertising works well there. And where it tends to work the best is for content-oriented type apps or websites or what have you. Things that people repeatedly go back to in order to receive something new. And so there's things that could go there, get something new, they see an ad. But if you have more of a functional app where they're using it for every single function, you may want to think twice about advertising and go more maybe an app purchase model or a download type model there.
So of course, I saw that there are a lot of hands up, so I know that there's a lot of questions. We are out of time, but if you guys are welcome. We're certainly happy to hang out by the egg-shaped structure over there and answer any questions. Thanks for having us.